Hi, Kevin. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, great. Good to speak to you, Ethan. Behind the curtain, eh? That's something I've been many, many times.
Well, we'll get into all that. But first of all, I want to talk about when did you first discover soul and Motown? When did that come into your life?
Soul and Motown came into my life in about 1968. I went to a school in Mansfield. I'm not from Mansfield, but my parents moved, and I ended up at a large mining town, big town, Mansfield, in Notts, and one thing I noticed straight away, although I have to say, actually, no, I'll say something else first. I'm not from a rock and roll household. My mum and dad, bless them, just did not like pop music at all. They were stuck with big bands from the 50s, and they stayed with them and until my mum's still alive, but my dad's passing. He still liked big bands. He didn't really get into any kind of pop. My mum didn't like Elvis Presley, Cliff Richard, which is very unusual. So you would think, well, crikey, well, there's no hope for me. But because of that, I probably went discovering music. So, like so many young kids being born in the 50s, growing up in the 60s, the first thing you're going to reach for is some kind of radio program because they didn't have any records apart from big band ones. So they had a radiogram. So I got into Alan Freeman and Pick of the Pops with what, well, it was a light program then. It wasn't even branded Radio 2. So that got me interested in pop music. But in terms of soul and Motown, I was 13 in 1968. 12, 13, 12, I think. I'd just started senior school. And one thing I noticed about that town, because it was a much larger town than what I'd grown up in, was the amount of moddy, skinhead looking people and the pubs, although I didn't go into pubs then, but they had what I call it was a jukebox town. I always refer to Mansfield. There was a lot of towns like that. Wakefield was there's a lots of towns, big towns that were just jukebox towns and had their own hits. So what might have been in the charts, um, I got used to, as you would do being a young person, but I started to hear other records that had not been in the charts. So when you get associated with that kind of music, you kind of think, well, everybody likes this. And then it was only when I got older and said, oh, what a great song, Bobby Wells, Let's Cop a Groove. You probably won't remember that, but it was just a record that girls danced to at youth clubs, with pop and crisps and stuff like that. And it was a northern, so what we now know as northern soul, but it was just a soul record. It sold a lot, but it wasn't played by Radio One, and it didn't get in the charts. But it was mixed in with Moni Moni and other pop records, Sugar Sugar, of the day. And I think that's what you get from a jukebox town. And as I say, there's lots in Yorkshire, lots in the East Midlands, probably lots everywhere, to be quite honest. I don't want to generalise because I'm not from the South. So there may be people who watch this podcast and say, well, actually, I'm from a small town in Sussex. And I remember that. So that's my first foray into the world of solo Motown, me just being inquisitive and saying, crikey, I've heard Tony Blackburn play that on Radio 1. What the hell's that? And there was quite a lot like that. And that sort of got me started.
Did you start collecting records in 1968 then?
Yes, but I wouldn't have known that. I just bought records. I just liked them. I was listening to well, actually, I started off with Luxembourg. I started listening to Luxembourg more than Radio 1 because Luxembourg had a more wide variety of playlist than Radio 1 at that time. So they played a lot of stuff that these jukeboxes and these little towns were playing. So that's really how I got going. But no, didn't really have the money to be buying lots of records, but I kept them. And, a year or two later, oh, I've got 200. And then you're becoming a bit of a stamp collector. You start, passing a junk shop or something where stuff's 5 pence. They're chucking them out Oh, I think I'll buy some because you could afford them.
What was your first Northern Soul night you went to then?
Northern Soul Night. Um, Again, I've got kind of two answers for you. Northern Soul wasn't really coined, the phrase wasn't coined until late 1970, might have even been January 71 by the journalist Dave Godin. Um, but no doubt people had mentioned Soul Up North or put the words together, but it was him that sort of projected that genre. So in 1969, 1970 at youth clubs, they were playing non-hits, which turned out to be Northern Soul records. I'm Going to Run Away From You, Tammy Lynn, Just a Little Misunderstanding, Contours, uh, 6 by 6, Earl Van Dyke. These are all things that actually charted. And of course, some had been in the charts. Stopper on Sight, Edward Starr, Boogaloo Party, Flamingo. So there was a lot of records that were mixed into playlists back then that have become Northern Soul anthems, but no one knew any different because you'd go to one of these youth clubby type things where there'd be no alcohol on, and girls would jump up first because lads were always a bit slow on the uptake, and they'd be leaping around to "Na Na Hey Hey Kiss Him Goodbye" by Steam, and then then the lads would try a bit of dancing. But then all of a sudden, one of these awkward Northern Soul type things cropped up. And you thought to yourself, wow, well, the inquisitive did, like me. I thought, cranky, what the hell's that? So you'd go up to the guy putting the records on, who'd probably only be a couple of years older than you. It was all, it didn't have it. The school or the youth club would have equipment in those days, and then they'd appoint somebody who maybe was a prefect or in the fifth form or the the fifth form or the sixth form, and he'd become the DJ. And that's where I got to know about all these fantastic artists that eventually I ended up working with many times. Four Tops and Archie Bell and lots and lots of people, Major Lance, lots of people. So that was the first time I actually heard this infiltration of Northern Soul into what we know as discos. But in terms of going out to a Northern Soul night where it was just solid Northern, and people were using the word Northern, it would be 1971 at the Britannia Boat Club, which for folks in the East Midlands, they'll know it very well. It's on Trent side and it's next door to Nottingham Forest FC, who I say don't support Forest, but I've got a big love for them because a lot of my family supported them. And they had 3 boat clubs next door on the River Trent, and the Britannia played Northern Soul. So I went there in late 71, still at school, and I just heard records I'd never heard before that all sounded like those Stopper on Sight, Edwin Starr type records. And I thought, crikey, this is going to be a lifetime to try and get these. And ironically, come 14 months later, and you'll find this one quite quirky. I find it sad, to be honest with you, at my age, but I didn't have a girlfriend. So I used to take my box of records everywhere on a bus. And the reason I took that box of records is I wanted people to say, "Excuse me, are they records in there?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And they'd say, "Could I have a look?" That was it. Satisfaction guaranteed. People had found this nerdy kid with a box of records and said, "Hey, you've got good stuff in there." Well, this one night, after doing this locally, going into youth clubs and stuff, nobody ever asked me to DJ, by the way. It's a good job because I wasn't a DJ at all. This one night, I got to the Brit. This is now 1970. I'm tempted to say late 72. I'd left school by then. It could have been January 73, but I think it was. I think I got like an audition gig in December of 72, and a DJ hadn't showed up, and I stood there. It was only about 20 people, and it was very early doors at the Brit in Nottingham, and I'm standing there with an orange juice, and a box of records. And oddly enough, the manager was a guy called Pete Hubbard. I do hope he's still alive and still around, because I'm not sure if he knows, but he gave me the first break, and he said, what do you got in there? I said, records. He said, oh, you're a DJ? I said, yeah. Of course, I lied. Um, he said, oh, right. He says, only I've got a bit of a problem with the Friday night DJ. He's not going to make it tonight, he says, although he'll try. I'll know in 15, 20 minutes. Now people are starting to come in and there's no music on. He said, well, look, until he gets here, can you go and put some records on? So I did. He never showed up. And I worked the entire gig, 8 till 11. Got paid. He then rang me in the week at my mother's house, and he said the Friday night guys left. He's gone to another venue, actually, that was better paid. He said, do you want the Friday night gig? So lo and behold, there you go. I got my feet wet, and eventually I ended up doing Friday, Saturday, and Sunday a few weeks later. So now I've got 3 nights. I'm just 16, and I thought, this is the best job in the world. I mean, I should have really gone and extended my education, but didn't bother. Like most 16-year-olds, what a life. I've won the lottery. Don't need to get up till midday. Only work Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Fantastic. Of course, that wasn't the right way to think, but that's how somebody like me did think back in 72.
So what happens after that? Then you mentioned you got a residency on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So
Yeah.
when you're playing in other clubs, do they come and sort of like poach you, or do you work your way into other clubs?
Well, actually, this is what happened. I spent the summer, the spring and the summer, working at the Brit Friday, Saturday, Sunday. In August of that year, something interesting happened. A guy who was a manager at a record store in Nottingham called Disc. Great store, very famous in the East Midlands. Lots and lots of people went there. It was like a 2-tier record shop that had opened in the late 60s, and they had rock upstairs. So they got all the student crowd buying, at the time, the hotties, Todd Rundgren, Hawkwind, Van de Graaff Generators, Zeppelin. And then downstairs, they opened a soul cellar. Where all the Motown, the mods, the skinheads, reggae, ska, all that happened. So it was a brilliant meeting place, and it was great for me to just go and hang about. I barely have £2 to spend in there, but I just wanted to be cracky. Who are these people? So that was all good, and then my wages went up at the Brit, and suddenly I'm a player. I'm in. So come August, the manager came into the Brit for a night out to bring a new contact that they'd got. And that contact was a guy who, this is an interesting fellow, because I myself do podcasts, do a show called Northern Soul Time. I'll get that plug in now if you don't mind, Ethan.
It is a brilliant podcast. I have watched it. It's brilliant. So.
Thank you. I've got a podcast coming up that features a character called Simon Susan. Now, he was, you have to follow me on this story, and I'll do it quickly because I don't want to bore anybody. But he was a French-Moroccan designer, and he came to live in Leeds. And then off he hoofed to California to make his life. And he then became a supplier to this record shop called Disc. He'd come over to see them. They'd taken him for a night out. Closest place playing Northern Soul was the club I worked at. And he loved the thought of British records. He liked British records, and he didn't have any left. So he went right through my box and pulled out a stack of about 50 singles and marched off with them. So I then said to John, who brought him down, I hope I'm going to get those records back. He says, don't worry about it. He will sort everything. Do not worry. Anyway, he comes back with about 100 records and says, fair swap. And I started looking through them, and I thought, wow, some of these records I'd only heard about. I knew they were rare. So I thought, well, if he's taking, old stacks and Tamla Motown singles I paid £1 or less for, these look to be more valuable than that. And I was proved right, because I started making calls during that week to one or two heavier collectors who said, oh my God, there's only two of that in the country. Oh, wow, there's only one of that in the country. So now suddenly I can elevate myself to a bigger stage. And just by accident, this is all good luck, it's good fortune, because I was still, practicing my art really, becoming a DJ. And one of the difficulties, and a lot of older DJs will tell you this, that once you get pigeonholed into a corner playing a type of music, you kind of are almost forgetting the skill of being a DJ, which is, segueing stuff and mixing, of course, today, but segueing stuff very quickly. I had to find that in my locker later, believe it or not, because Northern Soul DJs, I think, were a little bit more proud and wanted to, I won't say bore the audience with the trivia, but they'd want to sort of make it a dramatic, I'm going to now play the Velvets. It was very, very, very that kind of thing in the early 70s. So um, I got this box of records. So it's August 73. No other gigs. The phone wasn't ringing. Only people in Nottingham knew who I was, so my name was starting to be bandied around. But during those 4 weeks, some of the rarer guys who maybe wouldn't have touched the Brit, maybe they were travelling out of town to Stoke and some of the big Northern Soul areas. Um, I then started to go out to other venues again to show off my box, just like I did a couple of years before. Still no girlfriend, but now what's in my box is pucker. It's the business. So I went up to Blackpool Mecca, and there was a DJ there called Ian Levine, who went on. And it's interesting just to do a quick rewind, because I always feel that Ian Levine and Simon Susan, two characters, are very similar. In some ways, because they both went on to produce records. Ian, of course, produced Take That. He also had a massive hit with High Energy, Evelyn Thomas, and many other things. And Simon Susan, of course, discovered Shalimar. So he had hit records and as well. So they were both started out in Northern Soul and both went on, as did, of course, Pete Waterman. Let's not forget Pete in all this, probably the daddy of them all. He went on and had the greatest success, but never forgot his Northern Soul roots. So I've got this box. Things are hotting up. People are starting to come over to me and saying, hey, I hear you've got so-and-so. I hear you've got Jeanette Williams on Backbeat. Yeah, I've got it. Pulling them out I've been around for 50 years. Yeah, I've got that. I'll play it in a couple of records. Sort of developing a bit of arrogance. So I took my records up to Blackpool Mecca. Kept edging towards the stage. Didn't know Ian Levine, although I'd seen him before, because he DJ'd at the Torch in Stoke towards the tail end, and I used to go there. That was in 72 and 73. That was a great place in Stoke-on-Trent, pre-Wigan. It was like the one that lit the touch paper. It had more capacity than the Twisted Wheel, really the first major all-nighter. But not as many as Wigan. But it lit the touch paper for these very, very popular songs to really push Northern Soul into the big time. And Ian Levine eventually, as I kept cozying up to him, said, "Can I have a look through your box?" I thought, yes, somebody with influence wants to look through my box. And sure enough, he went through and had a bit of a dicky fit, to be honest with you. He said, "You can't have that. I'm the only person in the country with it. Now there's two." But of course, that was no threat. I wasn't after his job or anything. So now I'm really pumped up. That's fantastic. We get to September the 30th, which is 1 week after Wigan Casino opened in 1973. And yet again, I take my box out. By the way, I quit taking my box out to anywhere locally. I didn't need that anymore because I'm somebody in Nottingham all of a sudden. So if somebody said, "Hey, we're going down to a pub or whatever tonight," I wouldn't take the box, even though I still didn't have a girlfriend. Um, but I took the box to Wigan Casino because I thought, "Oh, all nighter." Now you got to remember, at this time, Wigan was not a fashionable place for Northern Soul. We didn't associate Wigan at all with Northern Soul. Probably Wiganers probably did, but I didn't know it. I'd never been there. So for me, if somebody said Northern Soul in 1973, I'd be talking Stoke straight off the top, Blackpool, you know, and maybe one or two other, Nottingham, of course, Leeds a little bit, because the Leeds, they've got a club there which I visited a few times, called the Central, which I believe now is called the Hi-Fi Club.
Yeah, yeah.
Leeds. That was the old Central
All
back.
right.
It was a good one as well. Good Northern Soul all nighter. Um, but again, it didn't have the floor space or the capacity to handle these crowds like the Torch, say, in Stoke, which held about 800-900. Wigan Casino opened not really to a fanfare. It just opened in September 23rd. People thought, okay, it's not a Stoke, it's not a Blackpool, and actually gave it a miss on the first week. I know I did. But they did get off to a good start. There was nobody of note on there. That was the interesting thing about it. The DJ who they'd given the gig to, the owner was a guy called Jerry Marshall. The manager was Mike Walker, and they picked a local DJ, I think as a safe pair of hands who they knew, because they didn't really know how to recruit the best DJs. At that time, it wasn't something you could Google and do a deep dive into finding out if these guys are any good or if they got good reputations. So they took a local guy called Russ Winstanley, and Russ said, "Yeah, I can organise this." He'd got some experience. He'd been doing weddings and a local rugby club and other things. So they gave it to him. He hired a local guy called Ian Fishwick, who I've never seen to this day.
Really?
Uh, yeah, no, never, don't know what happened to Ian. But it was those two guys who got the ball rolling, playing their sounds. I wasn't really listening too hard. I was just looking around saying, wow, I have never seen a venue as big as this. It held 2,500. It was gigantic. And if I'm being honest, on September the 30th, so it's been open one week so far. So this is the second week. It looked to me like there's about 800 in, which is a big crowd, but it didn't look very full when
Yeah.
you've got a venue with 2,500 capacity. So what happened was I just stood there chatting really to my friends from the East Mids. I didn't know anybody in the Northwest. I've been to a couple of gigs up there. I've been up to Varvars in Bolton and a place called Trogs in Bolton. But that's about the furthest I travelled. Some friends from Stoke had invited me up to Bolton, and that's why I'd ended up there. So I'd got a couple of contacts, but nothing more than that. They were mainly my Nottingham friends. We got up on a minibus, and all of a sudden, one of the we'll call him the team leader. He was more than a team leader. He was a bit of a heavy Nottingham Forest fan who was not shy at coming forward if there was a fight. So we all felt a bit protected by him. A lovely fellow called Denny Hendy. He's sadly no longer with us. And he came over to me. He says, "What do you think of the music here, Kev?" I said, "I'll be honest, Denny, I've been chatting away. And again, trying to show my box off to people so people can say, hey, that's great stuff you've got in there." So I wasn't really listening, to be honest. He says, "The music in here is crap. It's all stuff you can get. They've got no rarities. They need you on." So now I'm going into dead silence because, like, whoa, here I'm at the Brit, 150 in, small club. Now you're asking me to go on stage that holds 2,500. So he disappears, and I thought, oh, the DJ, I'll knock him back. he'll see him as some kind of troublemaker. So, but no, he didn't. He came back and he said, "Hey, I've got you an audition." So literally on the night, I went up on stage and I got a box of singles and one album. I never liked albums, and I don't to this day. I got into CDs, I got into downloads, and of course I've got a large vinyl collection, 7-inch, but I never bought LPs. I found them tricky. Maybe I was a bit too lazy to cue them in. I didn't want to find track 3, side 2. I never really had enough time to do that. So I'd got one album, and the album I took with me was the Four Seasons New Gold Hits. The ironic thing about that is, although they're a pop group, all the songs on this album were not necessarily big hits. And there was a track on there called I'm Gonna Change. It was my biggest song at the Brit in Nottingham. So I took it there, and I got the opportunity to do 30 minutes. Russ Winstanley said, I'm hearing you've got great stuff. Show me what you got. And I thought, well, this is unusual. Normally they, you've got to have a bit of a meeting and everything first. However, I actually got started at the Brit in Nottingham on the fly, on a wing and a prayer. So I thought, well, maybe this is how things work out. So I went on, and I thought, if I play to the Nottingham crowd, I didn't know how many Nottingham people were in there, by the way, but let's say there were 30 or 40, 10 on the minibus with me, and then some others. I did see other faces from the East Mids. And I played I'm Gonna Change first, and people were dancing to it straight away. So then I started to play the ones that I'd been handed by Simon. I say handed, I remember I traded Simon Susan, but the better ones that Ian Levine had been raving about, said, "Oh my God, you've got Patty Austin, Take Away the Pain Stain. There's no other copies except mine." All these kind of things were pumping me up. So I just gave them 30 minutes of, oh, I know that's rare, without really a backstory as to why they were rare. But I just thought, these are good records. Jeanette Williams, I played Something Got a Hold on Me. They're just all kinds of just really good records. And I did well. Without, but I was punching above my weight, no doubt about that. But I was inoffensive. I was no threat. And later on, I remember saying to Russ, after being in the gig for a while, "Hey, this is like the best gig in the world. How come we don't have more DJs?" And I remember him saying to me, "Like who?" And I started rattling off all these much bigger names than me and him. And he said, No, we don't need these. So I thought, crikey. It was only later on that I realised he didn't want to be upstaged. I would have done the same. I don't blame him, because he was in a very prominent position. You don't want to start handing over your gig to bigger names. You've got the gig, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we went ourselves, 2 or 3 of us, and I think we had Martin Ellis. Martin's no longer with us. He was a really good performer. He was a resident DJ at the Torch in Stoke. A lot more experience than me and Russ. And he taught me a few things as well. So between that and listening to Radio Luxembourg, I developed some form of a skill, although a bit raw. I picked up some skills there, and that's really what got me going. And the minute that became a hit, Wigan Casino, the phone started ringing. And then I had agents on the phone who wanted to sign me for, 5 nights a week. So I actually gave up the Brit. I left the Brit then in late 73, and I went to work for an agency in Stoke-on-Trent, and they gave me 5 gigs a week.
Plus all over the country?
No, because remember, I couldn't drive.
Right, yeah.
But within the Midlands, I remember doing, Tiffany's Coventry with Pete Waterman. I remember doing the Dirty Duck at Smethwick, Blue Duck, sorry, not the Dirty Duck, the Blue Duck in Smethwick with a guy called Barmy Barry. He was a great DJ, by the way. Barmy Barry, that was a real 60s name. And And it's an interesting bit of trivia, this, for those that don't know. Barry Carey's brother, I think, worked at Caroline. I think he was at Radio Caroline, the pirate back then. So he came from from good stock.
Yeah.
But Barry was brilliant live, and he's still a dear friend of mine today. He was really great. One of those kind of um, I was tempted to say Jimmy Savile types. That's the wrong phrase. It's the wrong phrase. But when Savile came on the scene, there was nothing like him. Hopefully, we'll never see anything like him again. But there was nothing like him in the '60s with the "How's about that, guys and gals?" These catchphrases, and Barry had got that off to a T. Only he was a lot more subtle. But he was a really great DJ and a brilliant person as well, I might add, and he's still around today. So that was my early life. That was my early life. It got me going. I learned how to get on a train to Birmingham and Crewe and Wigan and all these other places, and certainly 73, 74, 75. I was working 7 nights a week.
With Wigan Casino, is there a song that takes you back to that venue when you hear it now?
Well, it's interesting because there's some songs that were popular at Wigan, but they're even bigger now than they ever were. So I'll kind of just try and identify. I don't want to swerve your question, but if I tell you The Night, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons was a big song at Wigan, it was.
Yeah.
It's astronomical today.
Yeah.
It's off the scale. It's regular on Radio 2 and everywhere else. It's almost as if, well, it was a hit, but it's bigger now than ever. And there's some tracks there that were huge that have gone. You don't hear them at all. If I mentioned Afternoon of the Rhino by Mike Post Coalition, that was just incredible. It was just such a massive song, that, and you don't hear it at all now. It's one of those things.
Is there a night at Wigan Casino that springs to mind that was just a brilliant night?
They had live acts on at Wigan.
Yeah, I was going to ask about actually. Yeah.
Many that were great. In fact, it's interesting you coming from Leeds, because another, I won't say a good trivia story, not good for me anyway, but a fascinating trivia story is the very same agency that hired me on a 5-night-a-week contract also attempted to put an all-nighter on, not in Wigan, but in Leeds, at the old Leeds, what was the Queen's Hall in those days, but it had turned into a tram shed. I think it was a tram shed actually at one time. I wouldn't even know where it is today, but it was a very ambitious project indeed. But it did pull 7,000. Now, I knew, and I'd been told by the promoter, who was my boss at the time, that it was only going to be a one-off. It wasn't in any way targeting Wigan Casino, but clearly the agent had got a lot of experience and thought to himself, if they're doing 2,000 to 2,500 every week at Wigan, I can do a one-off maybe once a year and pull 7,000. And he was right. However, the head DJ at that time, who had hired me, took offence to this, and it's the first sort of, I won't say stand-up row, because he was older than me, and don't cheat your elders. That's how I was brought up. So I kind of I didn't take it seriously, but I could tell that after I'd done that gig and then got to Wigan, that daggers were drawn, and I think my card had been well and truly marked. And sure enough, it wasn't too long after that. It was like a slow death, if you like, me at Wigan. I didn't leave straight away, but it took a few months, and then I noticed my name didn't crop up in one advert this particular week, Blues and Soul. So I think the sort of the "we're letting you go" letter was already been typed out. It just needed signing off.
Why is that though? What's that
Well,
link to
I
Leeds?
think if I'd have gone back and been a little bit more professional about it and humble and said, I did the Leeds gig and it wasn't very good. It wasn't very good, to be honest with you, although it was very well attended. It was just poor facilities. The infrastructure was wrong. They'd had a circus on there a couple of weeks before. It was just the wrong place. And I should have said all those things, but instead I didn't. So there was no apology from me. So that's my fault. But then when you don't apologize or you don't build bridges, things get worse. And then I got more rebellious. So I got the records. So I just thought I was bigger than I really was. So that was a mistake. But as it turned out, the old silver lining and getting a bit of good luck, I left there in early 75 and then embarked on a kind of a different career. I was suddenly promoting events. I had a mail order business. I suddenly became Kev Roberts, the entrepreneur. Out of all that, I looked at what Wigan were good at. I looked at what the agency were good at. And during this time, I'd made a trip to America. That certainly opened my eyes.
Before we get on to all that, with Northern Soul,
Yeah.
obviously you've got to have the records, like you say.
Yes.
What else have you got to have as a DJ to be good? Have you got, what's your characteristics got to be?
Well, today you've got to be a lot more professional. Back then you had to have the records. These days, it helps if you've got both. You often don't see it on the northern scene though, because they're fans. Most of the people who are on turntables or on a stage today, it's not a career for them, because it could never pay. It could never pay. I mean, I'm in a very fortunate position that people do invite me to come to larger venues and pay the right fee, but most folks who are playing out every Friday and Saturday night are just generally nice people with collections who are not worried about the money. They just want to play their wares. So it's never really been a career, Northern Soul, as a DJ, until more recent times when, through history, people have said, oh, crikey, I found you on Google. I think it's really since the internet.
Really, yeah.
Yeah, because remember, people didn't know who we were. It was a small bunch. People often say to me, isn't Northern Soul really popular? Well, it didn't surprise me because you can read about it. You can find out about it. You can go onto YouTube and hear it. You couldn't do that back in the 70s. If you wanted to hear, some pretty obscure stuff, some pretty top stuff that only two or three had got, you'd have to go to Blackpool, Mecca or Wigan Casino to hear them, because your local DJ is not going to have them, or very few would. But of course, today, it's not really about that. I mean, it's nice if somebody's got the authentic originals. Of course, it's great, but I don't think the public today are going out for that. Some are. Some will be saying, "Oh, I like that particular DJ, and I know he's got the real McCoy, and I care about that." But a lot of them are just wanting to go dancing. And that they're not really worried. I think a lot of them are worried about vinyl. I think they want to hear them on vinyl. I'm just not sure whether they want to hear them on original vinyl. Some do, of course, but the majority, because you've got to remember, the Northern Soul scene today is far bigger than it ever was in the 70s.
Yeah.
Far bigger, because more people are aware of it. They don't always get the genre right. I mean, it's quite common these days to turn up at a soul night, which generally, when you see the word soul night, let's say you saw the word soul night in Leeds, generally it means Northern Soul. But the audience don't always know that. So they turn up and say, Soul Night, yeah? And the DJ nods his head, yes. And he's about to hit them with the Northern Soul winners. And they then ask for Red Light Spells Danger, Billy Ocean. Because that's now part of the what's going on.
Yeah.
With masses, who, of course, they wouldn't dare ask anyone for Billy Ocean at Wigan Casino, or even in the 80s and 90s. It wouldn't have happened because Billy Ocean's just a great pop star. He's a great pop artist. But now all of a sudden he's found himself with a bit of a single that was a bit of a youth club hit in the late 70s. And now it's infiltrated the Northern Soul playlist. So there's a lot of that going on. You know, you find in Dry as a Bone, 90s act, they've got a Northern Soul hit. There's some unlikely hit makers. But as I always remind people, there are unlikely hit makers in the 70s too, within the Northern Soul playlist. Paul Anka, for one. He had nothing to do with Northern Soul, but he had two big Northern Soul hits. So it's been an unusual genre, Northern Soul. It doesn't necessarily mean screaming Aretha Franklin and Otis Redding records. It can mean something totally different. And of course, it's a lifestyle. There's a lot of folks wearing the same dress, the dress sense, I should say. There's a lot of people who are just through camaraderie meeting up, you 2-3 groups of people just chatting about it and then having a dance. It's really unique. You're really unique. Glad I found it. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what did you used to think about the cover-ups of records?
You know what? There is a colleague of mine right back to 1973 called Richard Serling. And Richard and I worked at Wigan Casino. And kind of after I left, Richard really became the main guy for pushing the boundaries and wanting to make sure that Wigan Casino stayed at the forefront of really rare records or obscure records. And he was very much the main cover-upper. And he used to cover up the records, and plenty of reasons why. And it's done him a lot of good. In fact, there's forums now on cover-ups. Thank heavens he's still with us to talk about it, and he explains why he did it, what he covered it up as. So I would say Richard Serling was definitely the most prominent. People did it before him, by the way, but Richard really took it in another direction and made it interesting. And as people have got older who liked some of those songs that he played, you know, they'll say, now, what was that covered up as for a while? So it's become part of folklore.
Thinking back to Northern Soul, like in its peak, and even now, really, it's probably the first musical movement that brought everybody together, like gender, race, sexuality, like didn't matter. Would you agree with that?
Pretty much so, yeah. I mean, obviously, I wasn't around in the rock and roll days. Probably, you're right. Actually, yeah. I think rock and roll was social, but it was very much about the dance, which Northern Soul was. But Northern Soul meant so much more. There was so much going on. I mean, you had no time to think about anything else. Meeting friends on trains, you know, you'd be there with a cassette player or a discotron. You could pop a disc in it, you know, all those kind of things, and people would come and talk to you, and then you'd have a hold all with some badges on the side. But you know, you'd have some kind of uniform. People say, "Oh, you're into Northern," you know, and I don't think it's changed, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm not at gigs; I'm only at my own now, but I would think a lot of that is still going on. In fact, it must be, because I see so many events on. There's more now than ever. There's hundreds of them around. And I think a lot of it is not the original people. Some of course. But what's happened is they've swelled due to the over 50 generation looking for something else to do. and they've got into it and thought, well, I don't really know these records. You know, I bought Rick Astley, Never Gonna Give You Up. A couple sound like that. A couple sound like Billy Ocean. Some sound like Motown. But you know what? They're nice people. There's never any trouble. And they've got into it late in life. To certain quarters on the northern scene, that's offensive to them because they've only been in the game 2 minutes. But I don't think we can stop that. I think we should be proud of it. I know I run into a lot of people in the States, even today, and they, what they used to say to me in the 70s after they heard my accent: British, yeah. Do you know the Queen? No. You know the Beatles? No. And it went like that for 30 years. Now, if I'm talking particularly to people who are used to Brits, say in Florida or whatever, and I get introduced to somebody, often they know the accent now. Before, most people in the States only knew a Liverpool accent because of the Beatles, But now, of course, they'll say Northern.
Really?
Yeah, it's massive. We've had such an influence. I mean, there's radio stations now. Howard Stern, of course, has got this tremendous platform called Sirius XM. There's hundreds of stations on there, and I'm amazed at what crops up. And I think, hang about, that was never a hit in the States. The Night, Frankie Valli. I hear it all the time. Never ever came out in America. It's an American recording, but it only came out on Mo West through Motown. It's a British only single, but it's played because it's in films, it's on television. People have heard it, so they now know what it is. But it's the UK, it's the north of England. You got to thank for some of these songs in films.
Do you like that popularity of songs? Obviously, like back in the day when they first came out, there were flops. But like, say, Tainted Love, Soft Cell, that went to #1. Do you like it when these songs are getting the recognition and getting popularity, or do you prefer when they're obscure?
I mean, first of all, when Tainted Love came out with Soft Cell, and by the way, I don't know if you know this piece of trivia, that started in Leeds.
Yeah, Mark was from Leeds, isn't he?
No, he's from Southport, but he worked in Leeds.
Ah, right, yeah.
Idea for the song came with a local DJ who he doesn't live in Leeds anymore. His name's Ian Dewhurst, and he was Mark Ullman's friend. That's how that track got started. But I've got to tell you, what a brilliant job Mark Ullman made on that. I think it's great. It's very much of its time, but it was great. He didn't try and copy Gloria Jones at all. But it's a fantastic pop record. Gloria Jones' Tainted Love, I quite like. It's not one of my favourites because I just find it a bit boring, to be honest with you. Although I shouldn't say that, because if Gloria's a good friend of mine, and if she sees this, she might say, "How dare you?" But she's made better records than Tainted Love. But no, I like people to recognise what all of us have done, the pioneers from my era and the ones before me. I think it's great. I think it's great that somebody somewhere started playing these unusual tracks and pushing them forward. I think it's good, and I think it's great that the motion picture industry or radio pick up on these things, and they're in films. I remember watching My Girl, Macaulay Culkin, with my kids many years ago when they were small, and up pops Spiral Staircase, More Today Than Yesterday, which was a US hit, but it was a Northern Soul hit in the UK. So things that, that's been going on for 30 years, but I think it's going on even more. Adolescence, the hottest thing on Netflix. There it is, filmed in West Yorkshire. And don't want to do a spoiler alert for you, but you'll chuckle at this when you do get round to seeing it, Ethan, is that in episode 4, and I'm not going to spoil anything else apart from this, Stephen Graham is driving the car, and the family have come under some trauma, but they're deciding to have a day together, and they're reminiscing, and in the background his wife is listening to "Take on Me" by Aha, which is another great pop record. And they get talking about dancing. And she is saying, I'm not sure whether she says, I used to dance to this, or she clearly likes it anyway. And Stephen Graham comes off the back and says, you should see my Northern Soul moves.
Really?
So, wow. Now, that is the biggest miniseries in the world at the moment. It's number one in the United States. It's number one in the UK on Netflix. And again, a reference to Northern Soul made in West Yorkshire. How about that? So I'm very proud when these things crop up. It's fantastic. It's fantastic that something that the people of my age started with, or some guys even older, the ones who were around in the mid-60s. It's great, and I think anybody who doesn't want that, then just get a life. It's just I'm actually proud, very very proud that I've been associated with it. It's great.
One of the other good things about Northern Soul is kind of what we were just talking about then. It did like revive some careers and give them the attention. Like you said, a few appeared at Wigan Casino, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mean the artists?
Yeah.
Some made if you look at Edwin Starr, he had a multi-million seller in 1970 with War, which obviously America is very fond of as an artist and a song. Well, he had eye-to-eye contact as well, but War was his biggest one in the back end of the 60s, I think 1970 actually. But he made his money in the UK. He was a good friend of mine, Edwin. In fact, he lived in Nottingham for many years. And he was great. He was a great live act. It's a real shame that Motown couldn't hang on to him, but the reality was that they were always going to put all their eggs in a Marvin Gaye basket, and never in an Edwin Starr one. So people like Jimmy Ruffin, Edwin Starr came to the UK, had brilliant careers. Edwin was working 3 or 4 nights a week for 30 years. So he had a fantastic life in Europe. Occasionally do a German tour or whatever. But a lot of those acts came up. Tommy Hunt, of course. Tommy Hunt was even before their time. He was a major R&B singer in 1959, 1960 with the Flamingos and then on Scepter. And then out of nowhere, I think about 68, he comes to live in Wakefield. He must have been running away from the tax man. Again, he was a dear friend. He's lost his life, He just passed away recently. But he had, I think he was about 93, actually. So these people had good careers in the UK, and they thanked us for it. We'll take that all day. No problem. We started playing these records not for the money. We just wow, that Tommy Hunt's a great singer. Edwin Starr's a great singer. Jimmy Ruffin, The Temptations. These are all great singers. We're just happy to play them. I've often said to my friends stateside when they go, why didn't we get Northern Soul, Kev? I said, because you had too much going on. You got Vietnam to contend with in the mid to late 60s. Every time Aretha Franklin brought a record out, 1,000 Aretha Franklin sound-alikes brought records out. There could only be one Aretha. We were a much smaller country. We could dedicate our time. And I think we got more time to say, you know what? I've just heard another singer here who sounds like Aretha. Oh, let's have a listen to that. And then suddenly you're trying to find it.
Yeah.
Americans were not interested in that. They are now, though. Absolutely. Crikey, there's more Northern Soul collectors in the States than I've ever seen at any one time. If I ever pop my head around one of these conventions, these weekend vinyl conventions, they have a really good one in Austin, Texas. Everybody's there, so very slim pickings, I might add. But it's so funny to talk to people who I don't know. And, they'll see me flicking through the soul singers, and they say, if you want to see the big Northern Soul box, I can show it you. And there they go, and they've written on the side, big in Wigan, Blackpool Mecca anthem, and I'm chuckling. You know what I mean? I'm chuckling. It's great. It's great fun. I'm absolutely proud you know, I think they're proud to get the money they get for them now, but but they discarded them in the 60s.
When would you say the peak of Northern Soul in that era was? Because you had like, I didn't like 1 million people end up going to Wigan Casino over its time.
Well, that's the publicity put out by the venue. It's difficult to say. I mean, I have watched it through the decades. I mean, let's make no mistake here. It's always been popular. It's never gone away. I just think Wigan cornered that very large crowd on a weekly basis. No other venues managed to hit those numbers.
Yeah.
Been some great revivals. I'm involved in one, King's Hall, Stoke, although I'm leaving there next year. That's had some immaculate all-nighters with 16, 17, 1800 people there. But the scene has never gone away. There are quite a few people who seem to think that in 81, when Wigan closed its doors for the last time, that would be the end of Northern Soul. And maybe I thought that's the same. But I spent some time in America in the 80s. In 81, I was actually living there for a while. And I realized, well, hang about, things are still happening. Although I wasn't attending, the 100 Club opened in London, all right, a small club, but it was popular. The Queen's Hall, Bradford, cropped up. Top of the World in Stafford. Again, an unlikely soul town, that Stafford, because it had a great venue, but it wasn't particularly Northern Soul heavy. There were people from there, of course, into Northern. So I think it just changed direction. But there were quite a few people who kept the torch burning, glowing. So we mustn't forget them. Kiel is another place, the town where the university is. That was another good one. So there were numbers. It's just that I think they died off very much in the week, and you can see why, because as people got older, some would have stayed with it, stayed on the Northern Soul scene and followed it. But they wouldn't, as they got older, were probably having children and, marriages and various other things. So maybe the impetus wasn't quite what it was in the 70s, but they still kept in it. But some did leave, some changed style. I watched quite a few get into the second wave mod movement, Madness, Selector, Specials, Two Tone. Then some got into jazz funk. The whole London, Chris Hill, Caister scene infiltrated the North for a while. Then by the time the 90s came along, the 90s sort of saw a bit of a resurgence. There were some reunions, revivals taking place. But although one or two were quite good, it wasn't regular. It wasn't every week again like Wigan was. It was only when the noughties cropped up that all of a sudden everything that was good, it was like everybody who was around in the 60s and 70s fused together with people who were around in the 80s and 90s, and then it became one big umbrella of Northern Soul. And then the real kicker came probably about 10 years ago, when over 50s in general, people who bought Dancing Queen, ABBA, people who bought Rick Astley, people who bought the Lightning Seeds, in their pop music days, suddenly are older, get together with a couple who say, you know what, you should come Northern Soul in. It's great. Everybody's real friendly. Obviously, there will be some that go, oh, it's a bit heavy going this. I don't know any of these records. But if they've been pop fans, just general pop fans, the likelihood is they will carry on hearing Edwin Starr. They'll know Motown. So, all right, so 10 records are played and they only know 5. They don't know the other 5. But they soon get to know them because they can go on YouTube.
Yeah.
And get used to them. And there's CD compilations and there's downloads and there's things cropping up now. And there's lots of radio programs now that you don't need to be like the old ILR days of a of a radio station like the ones I used to work for, Burley Road, for instance, your area,
Yeah, yeah.
turning up for work every day at Radio Air and Magic. There's now a ton of stations, and of course, there's a ton of podcasts, and so people are exposed to it. So it doesn't surprise me at all how far it's come, and why people are into it so much now. They're wanting in. They're going, "Hey, this is great." So there's no problem. There's no reason for anybody from the 60s or the 70s to cock a snoot at these folks. Just say, come on in, the water's lovely, just enjoy these songs. Yeah, it does get a bit frustrating at times where you see a soul night, people are taking pictures. I can almost tell you what the playlist's going to be just by looking at the people.
Really?
Yeah, very much so. Very much. I don't need to be there. I can just look at the video. If somebody freeze frames a video and I look at the people on the dance floor, I know exactly what's being played just by the dress sense.
Well, I wanted to talk about actually your
Yes.
book that first came out in 2000, Top 500 Northern Soul Songs.
Oh yeah. Well, that was my book, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, your top five then was Long After Tonight Is All Over, Jimmy Radcliffe.
Yeah.
The Snake, Al Wilson.
Yeah.
You Didn't Say a Word, Yvonne Baker.
Yeah.
Out on the Floor, Dobie Gray.
Yeah.
And Do I Love You? Indeed I Do by Frank Wilson.
And that wouldn't necessarily be the same five today.
I was going to say, because you did another book, didn't you?
Yeah, I revamped it. I'm not promise everybody I'm never doing another one. But I did revamp it, and I'll tell you what influenced me in the revamping. I only ever wanted to write one book. I'm not an author. I just was somebody who felt nobody categorized the popularity of these songs. Some of these names, Yvonne Baker, they weren't hits, but they're played every week on the northern scene. However, that changed a decade or so ago. That's why I revamped the book. And the reason I did it is that a lot of new songs had become popular, not necessarily the Billy Oceans of this world, but other songs had suddenly come out of nowhere. And the reason they become popular is because they had an audience. So if you were one of the 2,500 that went to Wigan Casino, you either liked a record there or you didn't. Now we're talking about 250,000 people every weekend.
Yeah.
Not 2,500, a quarter of a million. And so some of these songs have excelled. Why? I don't know. I'm not a dancer. I'm not an expert. But some of them have really took off, and they've stayed a lot longer than just the Wigan songs. So Frank Wilson's still in there, although it's kind of very, very overplayed now. I mean, I'm hearing it on so many radio stations. It's untrue.
It's a good song, though, isn't it?
Oh, it's great. No, it's great. And he was a dear friend, Frank. He was God rest his soul. He was a lovely guy. But it is a great record. But some of those mentioned, The Snake, very popular, very fun record to dance to. But that's down the pecking order. It's fell from grace now. If you would put me on the spot and say compile a top 50 right now, I'm not sure it'd make the 50. You don't hear it a lot at all. I don't hear it a lot actually at these more commercial events. It seems to have just fell by the wayside. It seems to have been replaced, strangely enough, by records like Shout to the Top by the Style Council, which has got zero to do with Northern Soul, but that's a big Northern Soul record right now. It's very big, very big. And by the way, I love it, and I love Paul.
Sorry, yeah, well, you won't think that.
It's great. It's great. People like it. Yeah, it is this infiltration of general over 50s who have said, "Oh, I like that one." And once they say, "I like that one," and the friend says, "Oh, I like that one as well," all of a sudden you've now got, as I said, 250,000 people potentially liking it, not 2,500.
Yeah.
That's my take on it.
We just touched on there. Do I Love You? Indeed I Do. You mentioned Simon earlier. Didn't he have something to do with that being so rare or something?
Well, he was originally the guy that exposed it into the UK, really. How it came about, and it's well documented on social media, but I'll give you the short version of it. He ran into a historian called Tom DePiro, and Tom DePiro worked for Motown. He was in charge of curating a reissue label called Motown Yesteryear. It was a label that came out in the 70s and ran through the 80s, when Motown knew they were popular as a brand worldwide. So they decided to create this Motown Yesteryear. It was a brown and white looking label, and they'd put two hits, one on each side. Whilst talking to Tom being a very, very nice person, said, "Hey, I've got tons and tons of unreleased Motown singles at my apartment. Would you like to come round and listen to them?" You'd have to know Simon Susan to realize the flamboyance and the real character that's within him, but he doesn't need to be asked twice. He was there to listen to these finds, and one or two apparently were extremely good. As Motown really didn't make bad records, they're a great record company. But Simon, being the entrepreneur that he was, and boy, he had great ears as well. He didn't just discover Shalimar; he discovered some great Northern Soul records himself. He heard the Frank Wilson was played. He listened to it and he went, "OMG." Well, he wouldn't have said OMG then because it didn't exist. Oh my God. Oh my God. This is fantastic. And the rest, I don't want to say. Just read up on the story on social media. But it was Simon who got it to DJs in the United Kingdom, and the rest is history. It became massive. I think it was a win-win all round. It was a win for Simon Susan. Tom DePiro, we'll never get his side of the story because he's no longer with us, God bless him. Motown are happy because they've had one of the biggest selling oldies of all time, yet it wasn't a hit. And I hear it on American radio. It's played at the side of Baby Love and You Keep Me Hanging On. And I think, wow. So I think it's a win-win. Everybody likes it. People have profiteered from it. But it really has today, I've got to say, I could do with a rest from it.
Well, on that song, we were speaking about your brilliant podcast before. I saw your interview with collector Tim.
Tim Brown. Yeah, he owns it.
Yeah, you sold it to him for $5,000 and it's now worth $1,000.
I did.
100,000, sorry.
Yeah, my first marriage was ending, I might add. So I was in badly need of funds. So Q Tim, who I didn't know really at all, I think he'd rang me a couple of times, but it ended up with a remarkable friendship, and we were in business together for a while as well. So I met Tim Brown, but Tim Brown's sort of opening gambit was because Tim's very, very forthright and very straight. He's just a great guy. Tim basically said, "I want to come and see you and buy your Frank Wilson." I mean, most people would just, cozy up to me first and get the old arm around me. "Can I get you a coffee? Can I take you out for a meal?" And soften me up, but no messing at all. Tim, being a Yorkshireman, because he's from Calderdale Valley, he's from out at Todmorden, Hebden Bridgeway, and he thought, let's not muck about here. Kev's going through a divorce. I'm taking a big bag of money down to his house and I'm walking away with Frank Wilson. And that's exactly what happened.
Crazy. Something we haven't touched on actually is how, I guess, important amphetamines were in that scene and the whole thing, because drugs you mentioned Twisted Wheel before, that closed down partly due to drugs and the police.
Yeah.
Did it have any Did it ever have any impact like that when you were DJing?
Well, it didn't have any impact with me at all, no. And the reason I got scared with it, to be honest with you, seeing it, because um, a couple of guys who had got an influence on me, people I respected, took too many drugs. So I felt I'm going to steer well clear here. I'm just going to steer well clear. Not trying to be Mr. Goody Two Shoes. Many of my friends took them. A lot still do. But it wasn't for me. And I think the minute I got into the entrepreneurial world, I didn't give it a second thought. It has got still a strong following as much as a lot of those guys, well, guys, people, a lot of those people I find are very isolated now because they aren't happy with the commerciality of Northern Soul at all. So they've kind of clubbed together, if you like, and got their own venues, their own rare records. That they're keeping it real, which I take my hat off to. But at the same time, they are, to be fair, drugs is on the agenda. Let's not kid ourselves. Which is fine if that's the recreational that floats their boat, whatever. It also keeps Northern Soul alive. Not drugs, I might add, but people who want something obscure and darker.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so there you go. In the 70s, I never really give it a thought. It was part of life. I think young people are exposed to all sorts of stuff. They just are. Thank God, back in my day, it was amphetamines, and it in general didn't look too damaging. I'm no physician, but they seem to stay up all night and then they'd sleep it off, and then the next weekend the same routine. But of course, today I'm reading about horrors of crazy drugs where people are jumping off buildings because they've sent them, a bit doolally. So but that might be just age talking. Yeah, it might be age. I don't know how many people were into it. It was just part of life back then.
Well, we mentioned it's still as strong today than it ever was, Northern Soul.
Hmm.
You've played like different countries all over the world.
I
Which have
have.
been your favourite?
Um, they've all brought something um, to my thought pattern, to my brain. I love Italy. Love it as a country. The fashion and that whole mod Northern Soul vibe when I was there. I mean, I've stopped doing them now, but Italy was great. Wow, that was good to be there. I've done Rome. Have I done Milan? I think I've done Milan and Genoa and places like that. It's been great. I really liked Italy. I also liked Germany. Totally different scene there. Um, I've done some gigs in Germany. Um, One I particularly liked was an event about 10 years ago in Prague, in
Right.
the Czech Republic, because I wasn't really expecting very much. Because that had to be, because when somebody says, "Hey, do you want to come to this country?" The Czech Republic put together, and they were just a small chunk of enthusiasts, but they'd explained it very well to their younger friends to say, this is what the music sounds like, and we don't know really any of it. So I was one of the first that they brought out, I think, as an elder statesman, really. This is a guy who played these records and has done for decades. And I got into the spirit of it. And that was really good because they were very young. Wasn't playing to 25-year-olds, I was playing to 18-year-olds, and they really liked it. Big standing ovation, and it was fantastic. And the guys who promoted that are still doing it now. So that's a really good one. It would have never have happened had it not been for a couple of guys who just said, "Hey, we don't know this music, but let's put something on. Let's try it." And where else have I done gigs? France and I've forgotten all the places I've been to now, but I think Italy probably. I mean, I do my own gig, by the way, in Spain every year.
Yeah.
I'm in Benalmádena near Malaga, but that's more of a British gathering of my age group. But I would have to say, in terms of real coolness, real style. And I remember playing Billy Butler Right Track, first song in, because I always like to settle them down and give them something I think they know. And I saw this sea of, it was like Quadrophenia. I saw this sea of guys that looked like Sting. And I just thought, God, I'm so badly dressed. I am just so badly dressed. But I wasn't there for that for a fashion parade. I was there to keep hitting the start button. But that was good. Italy, I think. If I got my time again, I could play there every month. Yes, yes, please.
You do like Northern Soul. You judge dancing competitions.
Well, I don't judge. I'm the host
Or do
of
you
it.
host it?
They'd never hire me as a judge. I'm worse. When Peter Kay describes dad dancers, I don't even make that grade. I'm worse than a dad dancer. So I couldn't even judge a dad dancing competition. No, I'm the host of the Blackpool Tower World Northern Soul Dance Championship, which sounds very elaborate. It's a lot of fun. It's the right venue to hold it in. It probably wouldn't work anywhere else, although there has been some really great dance contests at the Torch and Wigan and Prestatyn. They used to hold one at Pontins there. It was a very good weekend event in the noughties. But the one in Blackpool is electric. I'm proud to say it. It's really fantastic. And again, you can look at it, and if you've been around a long time, it's very easy to be, subjective and say, oh, you know what, Kev, they're not as good as Frank at the Torch. And they may be right. They may be right, but styles have changed. There's a lot more energy. There's a lot more younger people going in for these contests. And there are some judges that go through the first, second, third round, whatever. But ultimately, the finalist is judged by the crowd. It is a clapometer sort of a situation.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it could be more professionalized. To be honest with you, we could have heats. We could come to Leeds one day and do a heat. But you know what? Uh, Together with my partner there, I said, look, let's treat this as an FA Cup final. It's on the day. It's whoever's got it all going on is
Yeah.
generally going to be the winner. And I've seen many favourites and many great dancers fall out at the last hurdle down to the last six and their legs go, or it's not an easy job dancing in front of 2,500, 3,000 people in there. It's very daunting indeed, and the crowd are cheering because it really is gladiator time. They're chanting. He's won, him, shouting. So, you know, it's it's amazing, really, and again, proud to be part of it. It's a lot of fun, and it's keeping the movement going. It's keeping interest in Northern Soul. You've got to do these things. If I hadn't heard Northern Soul records, I don't know what I'd have collected. Who knows? I mean, you just buy what's in the charts, don't you? You have a daytime job, you don't worry about music. And the odd record, you go and buy it. But when you get onto a scene, whether it be punk, heavy metal, goth, whatever you get into, you're hooked then.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I've been hooked.
So Northern Soul has been a constant through your life, but you have done different ventures like you mentioned before, radio, you're
Yeah,
doing podcasts now. Were
yeah.
you a producer at one point as well?
Yeah, for my sins, I was a record producer. In fact, I call myself the Ed Wood of the record production business. Now, for those folks who've never heard of Ed Wood, he made a lot of films. He did a lot of movies, and none of them were any good. And he failed miserably. And I was like that. I was just a guy who had got to the 80s, and I thought to myself, what haven't I done? What could I do? What, and you think you're good at everything, but clearly I wasn't. What I was good at, though, I was good at finding artists. I was good at listening to songs and good at putting people together. I would have been a good Mr. Fix-It. But unfortunately, because I'd become confident with my own being an entrepreneur, I kind of almost went Little Britain. I wanted to write the theme tune, sing the theme tune. Head cook and bottle washer. I'm producing it. I'm mixing it. I'm arranging it. So I wasn't musical really, apart from I had a little bit in the studio in the very early 80s. So I owned a recording studio in the mid 80s. Started releasing records at an alarming rate, one a week. And I was into all sorts. But the trouble was, the mistake I made when I look back, in true Ed Wood style, was that something had got in the charts. And I go, right, I'm going to make something like that. Instead of taking my time and working the craft properly. But I was good at finding people and putting people together. Very much so. So I ended up, I won't say making a hash of it, because it all worked out on the night. And the trivia attached to what I'm saying is quite interesting, because I got this studio. First things first, I had a lot of people through my door. I had people who'd had hits like Crush. They had a big hit called House Arrest. I had the Reynolds Girls before PWL. They had a hit with I'd Rather Jack. They came to me first. So I'd had some brushes with success without any real record sales. I also signed some kids on the YTS scheme back then, youth training scheme it was called, where you could get people you give them some experience and it didn't cost you much money. And I had 4 kids there that turned into 2 bands, Alternate and Bizarre Inc.
Oh, yeah.
Both had big chart hits in the 90s.
Yeah.
So if you get the pattern, what's going on here, they didn't have hits with me though, but they came through my doors and I saw something in them. And that's who I was. I just didn't quite get it together. Now, here's the sort of end game to my life as a record producer, which ended in 1990, by the way. Just before the studio was being sold, and I was getting out of Dodge basically, because I thought I'm just not going to. I don't know where to turn with this. And there were a lot of other artists, by the way, who've gone on to bigger things. A group called Double Trouble had some hits, and they were in my studio. There was a lot of people, but there was an old band in the 70s called Climax Blues that had a top 10 hit with a song called Couldn't Get It Right. And they were from Stafford. And the interesting link here, so just follow me on this, I'll give you the short version, I promise, is that a young lady called Carol Cooper had been my PA in 1983. Her husband was Colin Cooper, who was the lead singer of Climax Blues. In fact, the voice on Couldn't Get It Right. So Colin came round to see me and said they wanted to do some production and what were my studio rates, because it was the first 24-track studio in Stafford. So I was very, very, useful to certain people. There wasn't enough business to be had, by the way, but they took a shine to it. And they came in, and led by their sort of, he wasn't their manager, he was in the group himself, Derek Holt, God rest his soul, he's no longer with us. Neither is Colin. They started to use my studio. And by crikey, I'm glad they did, because this was around 88. If we fast forward 2 years, the studio was running out of money. Everybody was leaving me to go on and pursue other careers, quite wisely. I hadn't got them signed. But the interesting thing about all this is that these groups did have success. They'd recorded with me first. So the studio served a purpose.
Yeah.
Alternate and Bizarre Inc. and others had been through my doors for the reason of success. Well, we didn't have success, but there must have been something there. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had all these hit makers through my studio doors. That's the positive spin I put on it. But I could also say, well, due to personal life issues and other things, I knackered it up. That's the negative side of it. But I'd like to think that as time's gone on, good things have come out of that recording studio. It's called Blue Chip, by the way, and it was in Stafford. Anyway, the end game was that I had to leave that studio, and I got a big lease on my hands with a landlord that said, well, I can do you some favours, Kev, but you've got 13 years to go. You don't expect me to write 13 years off, do you? Well, what are you thinking? So I think he said something like 3 years off. I'd have to pay 10 years on a lease with no funds really to speak of, because the studio was losing money. So just by chance, Derek Holt from Climax Blues said, because I'd said, do you guys want it? Oh, we don't need a studio. We just need to demo here occasionally. They were still touring. But he rang me up one day and said, I think I may have an answer to all your prayers. He said, I found a buyer. I said, you're kidding me. He says, no. I said, right, who is it? I said, I can't tell you that. It's a secret. I said, hang on. You wanted me to sell you a 24-track studio, pass the lease on, and you won't tell me who it is? He said, no. He said, I can't tell you that. This was all before non-disclosure agreements and T's and C's and all that kind of stuff. It's all on a handshake in those days. So here I am in 1990, about to walk away from a marriage, about to walk away from a studio, already walked away from Bizarre Inc. and Alternate, who'd gone on to get record deals with other people, although recorded at my studio. And others, I might add. There were other not so well-known chart names, but others who from Wolverhampton who'd been using my studio and gone on to do different things. So here I am, and this person who I don't know is coming to see me to allegedly get rid of all my troubles, flush them straight down the loo, and I'm happy. I'm singing again. So I'm waiting, and Derek calls me and he says he's 10 minutes away. So I'm there and I'm making sure you've got the tea ready and everything else. So he came out to my house, which was in the lovely village of Weston Stafford, a lovely little place, which Sue Nichols lived in, who played Audrey Roberts in Coronation Street, by the way.
Okay, yeah.
And the only thing it was famous for. And I'm not from Stafford at all. My ex-wife is from Stafford, and my children were born there. But so I knock on the door, and in walks an American. And I said, okay, well, first of all, you better tell me I didn't know what was going on. I said, well, can you tell me who you are and why should I be listening to you? And he said, Kev, we'll be doing a deal today. Don't you worry about that. So he'd had the SP, he'd had the full heads up from Derek saying, Kev's a good guy, he means well, but he's lost all his artists. His recording studio's got no bookings. Save him, please. Save him, please. So the guy sat down and he said, well, first of all, and he kept everything, I think, deliberately right to the end. He just, by the way, I still don't know his name. No, not now. I know, it's bizarre. So he said, I'm the manager of Climax Blues. Okay. I knew they'd had hits in America, So the American accent, okay, now we've ticked a box. He said, I'm looking for a studio because I own a record label. He didn't tell me which one at the moment in time. And he said, I need it for demos. I need a cheaper studio up north that I trust people to run it, which would have been Derek because they were good friends. He'd been managing them, producing them as well, I think. And he'd also got a record label. And he then kind of, with a wry smile as he's sipping my tea, said, well, actually, I'm Stuart Copeland's brother from the Police.
Really?
And I said, OMG. Well, I didn't say OMG again. I would, because that's a now statement. It was, in fact, Miles Copeland. And Miles was the manager. And, of course, he represented Sting and everything else. And he didn't want a big hoo-ha. He knew the studio. I was going to say yes to everything. I was in no position. But he was a true gentleman. Took on the lease, did it all very quickly, saw me, went 4 miles into town, went to the studio, dealt with the landlord. I'm sure he dealt with the landlord better than me because the landlord probably thought, I don't really know Kev very well and he's going to skip town and I'm never going to see him again. But Miles Copeland, Sting, the Police, millions of pounds, he knows he's going to get paid. So there was a credibility fill right there. And he took the studio on and I was free of debt. And that was it. I exited the lovely town of Stafford and everybody went on happy as Larry and, had a bit of success. So that was my record production days over in 1990,
Well, what's life like for you these days then?
These days I'm semi-retired. I say semi-retired, although my wife would never agree with me, but I am trying to be semi-retired. I do events. I'm an event organizer. I have a partner up at Blackpool Tower, Blackpool Winter Gardens. I do an event in Whitby. I promote in Stoke. I do something in Spain. Where else am I? Sheffield City Hall. I don't do a lot. These are not every week, of course. These are annually, biannually, quarterly kind of things. So I'm doing that. I own a little radio station as well called 45 Radio, which I'm certainly not doing for money. I've just got some old pros, some old friends who've who contribute to the station's survival, and we're a gold station. There's lots of people doing the same thing, but we're doing it in a way that we think is a little bit more. We're filling a gap. I think everybody else would say the same, though. They'd all say, well, we're filling a gap, actually. Radio 2 would say, well, we're filling a gap. But we've narrowed it down. We're a kind of an up-tempo, in-your-face goal. So we're happy. We're a happy station. No dreary ballads. We've left the love songs alone. We're everything from wigwam bam to Motown to disco. We're just that's what we are. We're on a few DABs. We're in Blackpool. We're in Edinburgh. We're in Birmingham,
Yeah.
and we're in Sheffield and Rotherham. Yeah. So we're keeping our heads above water. So that's something I wanted to do. The events are still I'm with them until they end, till they end. So I've got that going on. So I'm busy because I think it's difficult to be an entrepreneur and do a lot of things and never punch a clock. I think it's hard to just stop and switch off. I tried it for a day once and I didn't like it at all. So I like to be busy, but I recognise that you can't take on too much. So I'm slowly deleting things out of my life simply because I just don't have the energy for it, But wouldn't change a thing, really. I mean, obviously, when you are an entrepreneur, you make a hell of a lot of mistakes. Anybody who wants to try and do what I do, I mean, you've got to have some passion to do it. Don't just come into it for the money. I didn't do it for the money, not to start with. Obviously, you have to then turn it into something, and that I've done. But I've enjoyed the ride, mistakes and all.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me. It's been great to speak to you, and I've learned some new things there, and it's been
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Ethan. It's been an absolute pleasure, and best of luck with Behind the Curtain.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'll now go behind the curtain. Stay well, my friend.
Yeah, bye. Thank you.
Bye, mate. Bye.
Bye. Bye.